Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane has filled several holes so far in free agency, but there are several left to fill. We're going to examine what's next for the Bills in free agency today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. We are a little over a week into the NFL free agency period, the legal tampering into the start of the new league year. There's been a lot of transactions. The Bills have filled some holes with bringing back their own free agents and signing a few outside free agents. Now, with that said, Brandon Beane's still got some work to do on this roster. There are several remaining needs. And so my objective today is to identify those needs and give you specific targets that Brandon Beane could pursue in free agency that makes sense to me to fill these needs. And then some of them will make more sense to address during the 2024 NFL draft. So I want to just kind of survey the current situation and talk about the options that exist to start filling out this roster even more than it already has. So in identifying the remaining needs, and I would say that these are in order for me: starting safety, defensive line depth, offensive line depth, running back depth, wide receiver depth, cornerback depth, and punt returner. There's still some work to be done. And so now I've given you the needs. Let's talk more specifically about them and who Brandon Beane could target in free agency. We'll start with starting safety, which I think is a hot topic for a lot of people. It's the most glaring need right now. Now, the good news is there are plenty, and I mean plenty, of remaining options for the Bills to pursue. And I like being patient here. One thing that I've said about this need at safety from the outset is that I recognize the significance of the need, but I don't think there's anything to panic over. There's so many options out there. There's still so many options out there. And I think being patient and finding value is the right move at this position. Obviously, Taylor Rapp brought in to be one of the starters, but you need a running mate for him, because I would hate for Cam Lewis to be the assumed starter there. So who's left? Well, like I said, there's plenty of options. There's some big ticket options, starting with Justin Simmons, outstanding safety from the Denver Broncos. And we just saw Kevin Byard sign in Chicago for 2 years, $15 million. I think that probably sets the parameters for what a Justin Simmons deal is. And the Bills can fit that in based on where you're seeing some of the projections. And they're, you don't know exactly what it is, but you feel like the Bills have about $10 million in cap space. And so if they wanted to go sign Justin Simmons, they could do it. And that would be a big ticket. That would be the perfect deep zone defender that's been a playmaker, right? We're looking for some impact here. Guy that can come in and make some plays. I think Justin Simmons is your best path to do that. He's a stud. Now, I do think it's important to identify that in this running mate that they need for Taylor Rapp, I think that ability to defend deep zones really matters. I don't get nervous about split zone coverage, and I think the Bills will live mostly in split zone coverage. But when they want to go man, when they want to go cover one, you'd like to have a guy that you feel has some range and some ball skills back there. Hello, Justin Simmons. Another fairly big ticket veteran that I'd love is Quandre Diggs. Had a heck of a run with the Seattle Seahawks. They've kind of purged a bunch of their defense, and he'd be a great target. Another outstanding coverage safety that also, he'll come downhill and hit. Same thing with Justin Simmons. So those are your kind of big fish safeties. I don't know that he's going to be quite the 2 years, $15 million that you would probably have to pay for a guy like Simmons, but 2 years, 12, something like that. I think that might get Quandre Diggs in Buffalo. Julian Blackmon. I really like Julian Blackmon from the Indianapolis Colts. He's a younger guy. Tore his Achilles a couple of years ago, but has come back. I think he had 4 interceptions last year. He's a stud. And he's probably the best tackler and downhill player of the guys that I mentioned. He's certainly the youngest. And so I think that'd be a reasonable swing for the Bills. John Johnson, who's been a productive starter for a long time in the NFL for the Browns and the Rams, he's available. Mike Edwards, who began his career with the Buccaneers and then most recently played for the Chiefs, I think he'd be a fine option. I think this is getting into a step down. I think Simmons and Diggs is kind of tier 1. Tier 2 for me is Julian Blackmon and John Johnson within the remaining options. Then you get into Mike Edwards, who I think would be fine. I wouldn't be, like thinking the Bills had an answer for more than just kind of a Band-Aid to get through a season, but he'd be okay. Eddie Jackson's also appealing. He's a guy with the Chicago Bears that had a tremendous start to his career. He's kind of tapered off lately, but if you're looking for a pure deep zone defender, he kind of gives you that. And then there's the upside play that I've kind of talked about quite a bit this offseason. It's Ashton Davis from the New York Jets. Was the 3rd-round pick, just come out of his rookie deal. Ton of athleticism. He was like a track guy that didn't even start playing football until he got to Cal. I think there's some upside there. Maybe there's some variance and, some developmental work. Probably the floor is a bit lower than what we talked about with these other guys, but I'd love to add Ashton Davis and another one of those players because Davis, at a minimum, has proven to be an outstanding special teams player for the Jets. And so as a 3rd or 4th safety, special teams, upside play, I'd be a big fan of adding Ashton Davis. So there's that safety conversation. I know that a lot of people are thinking a lot about it. I am too. And I think there's some good options. And I feel like we're at the point now where the value could be there. Let's move on to the next biggest need, in my opinion. Probably the one that I'm more concerned about. I recognize safety as the biggest need, but the need I'm most concerned about is defensive tackle depth. It's Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, and that's it. And you got a lot of snaps to fill. And I'm starting to think that this is not a bad idea for the Bills to start thinking about at pick 28, depending on who's available. And I've already heard the argument out there. Well, you're going to get a defensive tackle that's going to play half the snaps. Yeah, I am. I don't care about that. Are you kidding me? It's such an important thing that the defense has. And I hate that it's like a mitigated thing that people say, well, because they rotate, it's 40%, 45%, 50%. Okay, I mean, you want to draft a receiver that's going to get 6 targets a game and run a bunch of clear out routes and, maybe they'll play 70% of the snaps, but they're inconsequential on 30% of those 70 snaps. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? Safeties, yeah, they play 100% of the snaps, but are they inconsequential on probably 30% of those snaps? Like, let's be real here. A defensive lineman is significant on every single snap that they play. Every single one, even if it's half of them. So miss me with that argument about if you go for a defensive lineman, it's a rotational player. Get out of here with that. That's such an important position to me. And, football is still about winning in the trenches. You got to be able to win in the trenches. And the Bills, to me, right now, with their defensive line, don't have the depth right now to be the type of front that they want to be. And so I've set the stage here in just a second. I'll give you my players that I'm targeting at the defensive tackle position for the Bills left in free agency. And spoiler, it's a dwindling list. Stick with me. Folks, you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a best price guarantee. I mean, simply put, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I love the app. It's easy to navigate. They give you flash deals. They also give you your ticket right to your phone. So if you purchase a ticket, you don't have to dig through emails. It goes straight to your phone. So Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKED for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, folks, I finished that last segment talking about the need at defensive tackle. Let's talk about the options. And this is where I get concerned because there's not much. There's just not much left on the market. There's three guys that stand out to me, and then I think anyone else would be a replacement level option. Calais Campbell, veteran player, most recently for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, he's pushing 40 years old, but at this point, that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, you need rotational pieces. I think he's no longer a guy that's going to come in and command 60, 70, 80% of the snaps. I think if you get him in a reduced role, kind of playing behind both Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, I think you get a very meaningful addition to your football team. The next guy is Sebastian Joseph-Day. The Bills actually had him in for a visit end of last week. And so there's obviously some mutual interest on both parties. We don't have a deal as of this point in time. But as a backup to Daquan Jones, a veteran, a guy that's been a captain in this league, he'd make a lot of sense to me. And then as a pure three-tech backup, a guy that can maybe play a little bit on the edge is Mario Edwards. He's a veteran in the NFL. He's kind of been bouncing around the last few years, but he's got some athleticism. And at this point, the Bills just need some bodies to fill out this rotation. After that, there's just, to me, there's replacement level options after that. Calais Campbell, Sebastian Joseph-Day, Mario Edwards. If you're looking for a veteran, you hope it's one of those three. Otherwise, legitimately, I think it's just replacement level guys. There's a couple of players with some upside that are young. I don't know that they're needle movers, but there's at least some level of upside there. Marlon Davidson, who was the number 47 pick in the 2020 draft. He's already been on 3 teams since he's been drafted, so that's not encouraging, especially given he was a top 50 pick. But there's athleticism there. And again, you're trying to find some swings here. I'd consider that. And then James Lynch, who was a 4th-round pick out of Baylor by the Vikings, suffered an ACL tear. That's really kind of derailed him a little bit. He's removed from that. And so it's a very cheap, take a swing, some athleticism. James Lynch is a guy that stands out for me. All right, let's move on to defensive end depth. So we talked defensive tackle on the edge. The Bills do have Greg Rousseau and A.J. Epinesa and Von Miller. And so I'm not as concerned, but I want that to be better. I still think that you need another piece to this edge group, and I'm open to it at pick 28, and I'm open to it with some of the options that exist left in free agency. Carl Lawson's a name that I've continued to talk about out of the Jets. Really just kind of they invested a lot into that edge rotation last year, and he didn't get as much opportunity. But I think as a one-year player, I think he'd be fine. Derek Barnett really played well for the Texans last year, former first-round pick of the Eagles. Mike Dana, now this is probably a bigger fish here. Starter for the Chiefs. I think he's a stud. I think he's probably an $8 million a year player. So this would be a bit of a swing here. I think these other guys are a lot less than that, but Mike Dana is a really good football player that balanced player, right? Can defend the run, physical, powerful pass rusher as well. So if you're looking to really add, Mike Dana would be the swing. Dwayne Smoot is a player I really enjoy, has been the 3rd defensive end for the Jaguars for a number of years. Every time I watch Jacksonville, I feel like he pops. Travis Gibson is a young player that, I think he's had some ups and downs throughout his early career, but there's been impact as well. I'd be curious to see him come to Buffalo. Marquise Haynes, if the Bills are looking for a pure speed guy, if they're looking for a guy that can do some of the stuff that they asked Leonard Floyd to do, he'd make sense to me, most recently with the Panthers. Tyus Bowser was recently released by the Ravens. Again, kind of if you're looking for more of that Leonard Floyd hybrid role, I think you can get some production out of Tyus Bowser. Marcus Golden, as a veteran, seems to be just one of those savvy guys that, while he's aging, still crafty player that knows how to make an impact in a part-time role. And then Shaq Lawson. I mean, I'm at the point where I'd be interested in him back on a minimum deal because you got to fill out this rotation, and at least you can trust Shaq Lawson to be a fundamentally sound player, although the impact might be, he's not going to make a ton of splash plays, but he'll do his job, and I think that has some value. Offensive line depth. Let's shift over to that real quick here, where between the shift with the offensive line, Connor McGovern to center, David Edwards to left guard, that sounds good, but it needs to happen. You traded away Ryan Bates, so things are a little bit more thin on the interior offensive line. You're really relying on Alec Anderson to emerge as a depth piece. And then same thing at offensive tackle, where it's Ryan Vandemark and Tommy Doyle as the top reserves there. I want more there as well. So some offensive line depth that intrigues me, starting with Brian Allen. I'd love for the Bills to sign Brian Allen. I think it would be a 1-year minimum type deal. Was drafted by the Rams when Aaron Kromer was there, started for a couple of seasons with Kromer. Then he signed a 3-year, $20+ million contract extension. And he had an injury, and then he came back, and he couldn't win a starting job the next year, beat out by Coleman Shelton. I think he'd be a perfect player to go spend some time with Aaron Kromer and not only provide depth at center, but a nice hedge. Like if this Connor McGovern to center thing doesn't work, Brian Allen's an experienced center in the NFL that's played under Aaron Kromer. I think he'd be a phenomenal addition to the depth of this offensive line. Other players that intrigue me, Kendall Lamb at tackle. I think he's been a very good swing tackle in the NFL for a number of years, has done an admirable job in Miami, filling in when necessary for both Austin Jackson and their left tackle, Teron Armstead, who seems to be injured all the time. So I think he'd be a nice addition to the Bills, and he kind of hurt Miami as well because they've relied on him a lot. Josh Nijman, who's been a really productive fill-in player for the Packers throughout the years. They've had a lot of injuries to their offensive line, and Josh Nijman has been important for them to be able to steady the ship a bit whenever, David Bakhtiari's been injured a ton, and Elgin Jenkins's been injured a ton. He's filled in a lot. Michael Dieter from the Texans this past year, he's a guy that can play multiple spots if you're looking for some versatility, including he can snap and play center. He's a player I loved coming out of Wisconsin. Hasn't necessarily emerged in the NFL like I thought maybe he would, but I think at a minimum he provides some value as a multi-spot interior offensive line player and even tackle if you really needed it. And then Max Sharping, who's been on Houston, who's been on Cincinnati, can play guard and tackle. I think he actually played in that playoff game against the Bills that they lost against Cincinnati and filled in quite well. So as a versatile reserve that has some experience, Max Sharping makes sense. I want to talk running back as well in this block, and then in the last block, we'll talk wide receiver depth, corner depth, and punt returner. But running back depth, I know the Bills brought back Ty Johnson, and it warms my heart to see the enthusiasm for that, from so many, and excited to see Ty Johnson back on this football team, and I am too. But you're going to roster 3 running backs, and there's probably room to get some run, right? Some opportunity for another running back on this team. And James Cook looks like he's a durable young player, but you're one snap away from Ty Johnson and, right now, nobody. So you got to fill this out. There's a couple of veterans that I like. I've talked a lot about Zeke Elliott and how I think he's the perfect depth addition for this team as a short yardage back, pass protection, can catch the football as a veteran for the room. I'd love that. Rico Dowdle, I think would be a minimum type player from Dallas, a physical downhill player that I really liked at South Carolina, and I thought he played well last year for Dallas as he got more opportunities behind Tony Pollard with Zeke Elliott no longer in the mix in Dallas. Deonta Foreman, I feel like he's just found production in Tennessee and Carolina and Chicago the last 3 years. I really like him as a physical downhill player that has some athleticism. An X-Factor player, and there's some new names that I've added to the mix. I know I've talked about some of these guys in the past, but I've added some players as I've started to look deeper into things. Patrick Taylor from the Green Bay Packers, 25 years old, 6'2", 215, 220. Came out of Memphis, was like a Swiss Army knife for Memphis, but as like, think about what Washington has done with Antonio Gibson, but forget the fumbles and all the blunders with the ball. I think Patrick Taylor has some upside as like an X-Factor back that can catch it and pound the ball and be physical between the tackles. He'd be a guy that I'd have some interest in as well. I'll also say Josh Kelly, if the Bills are looking for a pure downhill running back that has a little bit of experience in the NFL. Josh Kelly from the Chargers last year makes some sense to me. So there's some options there at running back. Maybe they draft one in the middle rounds. but they got to fill out this running back room. I mean, at some point, they're going to add probably, I would guess, at least three running backs, one that'll make the team, and then at least two to get through camp and provide some competition and provide some depth and get you through the preseason. So there's additions coming at running back. It's just a matter of who. All right, folks, we'll talk wide receiver, cornerback, punt returner, all on the other side of it. So be sure to stick with me. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, that you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, folks, welcome back. Before I talk about the rest of these players, I would like to invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. It's been almost a year since we started this, and it's been incredible. Here's what it is. It's one-on-one text messaging with me. You can text me. We can talk Bills football, answer your questions. I love connecting with the listeners. It has been so cool to be able to do that. You also get my first reaction to all major Bills news. So I initiate conversation as well. Whenever the Bills make a move, I will send out a text letting you know what happened and my initial thoughts on the move. Sometimes I send out some thoughts about the team. I've sent out, free agent target list, all kinds of stuff to our subtext subscribers. So you can be part of that, and you get access to our Discord channel. So the text messaging is kind of cool. It's one-on-one. We can text, but then we also have a community aspect to this with our Discord channel where there's like 600 Bills fans in there. We're talking Bills, NFL draft, other sports, life, all kinds of stuff. And there's a film clips channel. In fact, over the weekend, I put some film clips in there of Curtis Samuel and Nicholas Morrow as I was going through the tape. I give minute and a half, 2-minute analysis, kind of just doing a voiceover of the video clips as well. So there's a lot going on. It's super fun. Check it out. If you want to join, there's a link in today's show notes. So if you're on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast, click on the show notes and you can join the Locked On Bills subtext community and get in on the fun. Would love for you to be a part of it. All right, wide receiver depth, cornerback depth, and punt returner. So wide receiver depth, the Bills have added Mack Hollins, and I don't have a ton of concern about the overall depth. I think the Bills should still draft a receiver at some point. I don't feel like it has to be at 28. It'd be okay if it was at 28, but I think they're going to draft a receiver. And so when you look at this room and you see Diggs, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Mack Hollins, that's 4. The Bills only rostered 5 last year. And so if you drafted one early, well, there's your 5th spot. If you keep 6, then they've done that in the past as well. And then you have room for another player. But I think at this point, it's probably just some depth. And there's 3 players from a depth perspective that intrigue me. One of them is Jalen Guyton, who has been injured. Okay, no doubt. But boy, when he's on the field, has he provided an explosive vertical down the field threat for Justin Herbert. And so as a true field stretcher, which I think is probably still missing in this Bills receiver core, he could provide that as a low-cost player. There's risk involved because he's been injured, but if he can stay healthy, you can have a field stretcher there. Isaiah Hodgins, he's not going to be back with the Giants, and so that was kind of been an interesting journey. He was with the Bills. Everybody seemed to love him as, the Bill. I know Bills Mafia. There's always some receiver on the practice squad that you guys love, and you get enamored with him, and Isaiah Hodgins was that guy for a while, and then he finally gets signed off the practice squad to go to the Giants, and for the rest of that year, it was 2022, he had some really nice production for the Giants, and then there was all this thought that 2023 was going to be this huge breakout volume year for Isaiah Hodgins, and he literally did nothing, and they didn't even bring him back as a restricted free agent. So he's back on the market. I think he can come as a minimum type player. There's always been appeal for me with Isaiah Hodgins as a taller receiver that I think can run routes, that has really good hands. Now, he has limitations, right? Not very explosive, not very physical. And for a guy that, is going to be like a depth receiver, he doesn't offer a lick of special teams value. I mean, even with the Giants, he played like 2 special team snaps throughout his time there. So there's things missing from this skill set, but as a depth player, I think Isaiah Hodgins would be interesting. And then also Laviska Shenault was a second-round pick by the Jaguars a few years ago. He had 600 yards in his first 2 seasons in Jacksonville. Then they traded him to Carolina Panthers, and he did nothing in Carolina. And that makes sense because, I mean, that offense has just been a joke for the last couple of years. And so I don't really expect to have seen the best version of Laviska Shenault, but I still think there's some appeal there. He's 6'2", 220 pounds. He's 25 years old, has 158 career catches in 4 seasons, and he averages 7.2 yards after catch per reception. I'm at least a little bit interested in that in a depth role and a minimum type signing just to kind of see what type of X factor he could provide. So going more the intriguing route with some of my ideas at wide receiver. Cornerback depth, I think this is important because, the Bills lost out on Dane Jackson's a Carolina Panther. Tre'Davious White is no longer around, and he's getting some looks, visits with the Raiders and Rams this week. And the Bills have used their cornerback depth, throughout the last 3 years. They've really used a lot of their depth. And so I think your top 3 of Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, and Kyer Elam looks really strong. I still think you need a 4th guy. And then also you think about depth behind Taron Johnson in the slot. Maybe that's Cam Lewis, but I wouldn't mind having a guy that, you can make Cam Lewis more of a safety, and then you have another option behind Taron Johnson that provides some special teams value. So 2 guys that are, well, I guess guys that make sense to me. Levi Wallace was a Bill, went to the Steelers, now on the free agent market. As a guy that knows your defense, that I think there's a floor there that is at least appealing. I think he can come in. Now, the problem with Levi Wallace is he doesn't offer any special teams value, and so you're talking about a 4th cornerback. You need special teams value, so that's kind of the holdup there. Rocky Sin, a young player in the NFL that is floated around a little bit for a guy that has a pretty appealing skill set. I think he would provide special teams value. He's a physical guy. I think as a 4th corner, he makes a lot of sense. Christian Fulton, he's a guy that I've talked about a lot. Was a second-round pick of Tennessee, and I thought his early career stuff was strong. The last couple of years have not been as good. I think that's coincided with a lot of Tennessee and they've had so many issues over the last couple of years, and just guys kind of falling out. And I think that's kind of happened with Christian Fulton. But the Bills do have Scott Booker, who is part of that coaching staff, DB's coach in Tennessee, now in Buffalo. There should be some familiarity there. I think Christian Fulton has some upside, and a talented young corner that has some upside as your 4th guy to just take a flyer on. I think he makes a lot of sense. And then if you're looking for a true backup slot, pure special teams guy, Tavir Thomas is a great addition. He's from most recently the Houston Texans. He's a veteran in the NFL. I think he recently visited the Bucs, but as a guy that I think can legitimately step in the slot, legitimately provide special teams upside, he'd be a heck of an addition. Real quick on punt returner. The Bills need to get a punt returner. And I know that some people think you just put anybody back there. That's not the case. If you've watched the Bills for the last 5 years, you should understand that. You need somebody that is going to make good decisions with the football, that's going to be a very good ball handler, that's very good at fielding punts. You've seen issues with Isaiah McKenzie going back there, and not only was there variance in how he caught the football and there being some muffs, but also, there are just too many instances where he didn't catch the ball and he let it bounce, and all of a sudden it rolls 15, 20 yards. And that's literally a 15, 20-yard loss, right, in field position. That's a big deal. Just like catch the ball and catch it, and the Bills offense starts at the 30 instead of the 10, right? Like, there's a decision-making component that matters a lot. There's some veterans out there that would make me feel a lot better about the punt return situation. The guy I would love is Jamal Agnew. He's unbelievable. He's a phenomenal return guy. If the Bills can get him, that'd be amazing. He fractured his leg at the end of last season, so that's something to be mindful of. But I wouldn't think that really jeopardizes the 2024 season at all. He'd be a special addition to the Bills' return situation. Hunter Renfrow, last few years with the Raiders have just not been good. He's not been productive at all. And that's kind of surprising given Josh McDaniels and how he's been able to feature slot receivers in the past. The one thing that I think Hunter Renfrow can do is, well, he would provide some value as a returner, but as a receiver, but he would immediately check the box as a punt returner. Deontay Hardy, I'd love to bring him back as just a punt returner. I thought he did a good job of that last year. I want some consistency and a steady hand back there. And then one other guy that had some level of appeal to me, not a ton of appeal, but some, Alex Erickson, who's bounced around a little bit, most famously with the Bengals, has a pretty robust resume of handling punt return duties, even if it hasn't been super productive. He's done it, and I think the Bills need to get a guy that they can trust back there. So there you have it. The remaining needs, what Brandon Beane can do about it. I felt like we needed kind of a reset. We spent so much time examining this roster and talking about the possibilities. Well, the possibilities kind of have come, and there's still work to be done, and there's kind of a new look to this roster, a new feel to some of the position groups, and I wanted to reset kind of the free agency conversation today. And so we'll get onto some draft talk the rest of the week. I want to get to herd mentality. If Brandon Beane makes more moves, we'll talk about all of that. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.